We got someone's sunglasses up there. There we go. I'm absolutely thrilled to be back at DLD. I was here in January of 2020, and it made a great impression on me. So I'm very happy to come back and share what I've been working on, right? Which is after this book I wrote a couple years ago called Beyond the Valley. And really what I want to focus on, we can start the deck, the slides. Okay, excellent. So what I want to do is really try to give us a set of glimpses and perhaps a set of inspirations to recognize that we are at a critical inflection moment when it comes to technology. We have an opportunity to move and transform technology in the image of the planet and in the image of all of us as people. And that doesn't necessarily have to be at odds with business decisions that are being made, but we have to think creatively about it as a great creative design challenge of our time. So I'm going to take you on a little bit of a journey to give you some insights and inspiration on how we might be able to get there. Pretty much every tech exec these days describes us as entering an age of AI. But our discussions about AI are not particularly interesting in my mind. On the one hand, we see a lot of sort of fantasy and anxiety, right? We see sort of both a sense of deliriousness that, what is this AI that's taking over our lives? And it's sort of something that inspires a sense of anxiety also on the other hand, where there's a great amount of criticism that technologies are dooming us. But neither of these perspectives really take into account the questions of who technology serves, how it's designed, and what are the systems it's related to. And so in many ways, we don't see what is most interesting in relation to technology, which is its fundamental connection to the realities we face around the planet today. And what has happened is nothing less than astonishing, and we all know this, right? An incredible amount of wealth and valuation and profit has been amplified in the hands of very few, not because of the fault of technology, but because of some of the business decisions that have been made to drive technology. So the most wealthy and highly valuated corporations in the history of the world own almost nothing and hire almost nobody. Think about that as a business model, right? And so that is the moment we've arrived to, but that doesn't have to necessarily be something that is solely rooted in criticism, because they have done an incredible job at innovating using flexible, creative infrastructures to bring people and resources together. But the question of what purposes it serves is what I want us to really think about, and it really inspires my work in many different ways. And what we really see is technology as an amplifier, right? We saw a sort of transference of wealth and valuation and power and data valuation and speculated valuation that occurred during the pandemic as many of us became more technologically dependent than ever. How many of us used Zoom on a daily basis before the start of this pandemic? But we all were daily Zoom users, many of us around the planet, during this pandemic. So that means Zoom accrues so much value because of the dependence we have on it and all of the data that that is being able to be gathered and valuated upon based upon this actual business model. But actually, this business model is not particularly sustainable on the level of our people around this planet and on a planetary and environmental level. Because many of these businesses that I'm alluding to, that are holders of data, that are monetizing every transaction in terms of data, are valued at a great amount while actually not even being profitable, right? So on a macroeconomic level, we have a huge challenge that we're facing right now. And this is actually astonishing, right? We live in a world right now where 8 people, more or less, have equivalent wealth to 4 billion. And in the United States where I live, 3 people have equivalent wealth to about 170 million people, right? And many of those 8 and many of those 3 are connected to the vectors of technology. So we don't want to get into this technology as traumatization or technology as, transcendent, transhumanist, cyborg fantasy. We want to move out of those and actually locate technology into the questions that we want to ask as human beings, which is, how do we want our planet to be? How do we want to live our lives? What are technologies that support the purposes of collective being as well as individual being? Because in the United States, for the first time in the history of our country, and this is something that's not so widely known, not only is life expectancy decreasing, which is also true in the UK, but also this is the first generation in the history of the US, and many of my students talk to me about this, to make less in terms of income than its parents, even if you control for inflation. So you see a declining standard of living, you see a declining life expectancy, concurrent with massive exponential advances in medical technology, environmental technologies, social media technologies, AI technologies. And the issue here is the uneven distribution by which these technologies are being designed and who they serve. So here's a great design and engineering challenge. What does it take to build such systems in the image of collective being, rather than continuing to live in a zero-sum model which assumes that your benefit is my loss or my benefit is your loss? Is that really a truth of what it means to be alive? Is that really a truth of what it means to be human? So these are some of the big issues that we're encountering these days, and these are all connected to technology because technology is an amplifier, right? And it all depends on the values we inscribe into technologies of all kinds. And I think we also need to ask a tough question about our planet and its habitability. And specifically the question, and this is a piece I wrote for Salon, why is it those who are most profiting and extracting such great value out of these digital transformations seemingly so cynical and disinvested in our planet? Right? Some of us might have seen the movie Don't Look Up, right? This is an expression of a certain kind of cynicism, fatalism, alienation that is occurring even amongst those who are most profiting off of technological transformations. So I think something needs to shift, and what that is that needs to shift is we all need to be involved in driving the technologies of today and tomorrow so that it's a much more multivocal process rather than a process of surrendering, submitting, getting stressed out, and getting anxious. So it's very well known that many algorithms are optimized, especially on social media, to monetize attention, right? And that attention, we know, can obviously be tied to content that is selected for us online, whether it's through search or social media algorithms or other platforms that gets us aroused or outraged or kind of riled up, right? So dopamine, cortisol, and adrenaline are three key raw materials, I would argue, of digital capitalism, right? We can talk about labor and environment, but let's think about hormones as part of this concoction. So this, I think, is very important because we also see a great amount of sociological research as well as journalistic work that basically argues that more and more in Western societies, and we certainly see this in the United States, there's greater alienation and isolation than ever before. I'm sitting here in Germany, and I'm a sociologist very influenced by Emil Durkheim's work from centuries ago and his concept of anomie, that certain kinds of technological, unevenly distributed technology innovations might divide and isolate people. It's not the cause of technology, but when we don't all come together in massive transformations that we make globally or in society, it can individuate and isolate us. And think about that. Think about your digital experiences, your experiences with the internet, your experiences when you're online. It is individuating, right? It's all data from the past, targeting you individually as a discrete person that structures your present and potentially your future. But we don't live alone. I don't live alone as a single person. I live relationally. I live in relation to all of you right now. I live in relation to the DLD organizers. I live in relation to my neighbors, my family members, the people I work with. So our technologies are individuating us through quantification, yet we are social animals living on a planet where we're quite honestly all in it together, whether we like it or not. And we saw that with the pandemic, and we see that with climate. So this is very important because now the new normal is psychographic manipulation, right? We essentially become products of algorithms of quantification that are supposed to psychologically stir us up in certain ways, but in many different ways, we actually see that that actually can quantify and break apart a certain kind of democratic vision of life as it stands. So these are the critiques, and what I want to argue for is a new vision of a digital economy, of a global digital society that's regenerative, right? Something that's regenerative is not just a one-off, right? It's not just transactional. It spills over, it creates jobs, it spurs on innovation. It has externalities that are positive, right? It's not just that I want to save as much money on water resources as much as possible, and then I end up polluting the river, right? It's a systemic thinking for design. It's a systemic thinking for innovation of all types. And this is critical, right? One type of systemic thinking we can do right now, and this study has been often disputed, I have to note, are thinking about jobs of the future. What are jobs of the future where we work with technologies, where we work with automation? What does a type of dignified work and dignified economy look like into the future on a global level? And this is also partly why discussions around concepts like universal basic income or the more progressive idea of universal basic dividend, where everybody owns some part of any corporation that uses public subsidies, are really underway right now. Because you can think about it at the end of the day, given the macroeconomic issues I'm seeing, if we have two economic models, one that is about short-term speculated valuation, and on the other hand, we have macroeconomic models that see us as more divided, isolated, and polarized, and economically stratified than ever before, we have a choice to make. What type of economic model do we want to drive technology? And this is really the key point here. My colleague Achille Bembe, who I spent some time with in South Africa, argues we need a new planetary consciousness. We need to recognize we are part of a planet. And we see that every single day in many different ways. But if we hide behind technologies that individuate us, we may not recognize those existential realities. So what does it mean to be global? Well, it doesn't mean we build something and send it out there and not worry about what happens to people. It means we engage in dialogical relationships. So this, I think, is absolutely critical when you start to look at the parts of the world where the internet is really most rapidly impacting people, right? So when you think about where are the vast majority users of technology, they're not in North America and they're not here in Europe. They're in Africa, South Asia, South America, and so on, right? These are the places, especially Africa, that has the youngest population in the world, the fastest growing population in the world, and the place where technologies are most rapidly intersecting and colliding with people. But we also know that many of our digital devices use raw materials that are extracted from Africa. Cobalt, tungsten, coltan, right? So imagine a system where you extract raw materials, you build it into devices like, an iPhone that is designed to die after a certain date, planned obsolescence, and then it dumped back into Africa as electronic waste. So primarily so far, what I'm sharing with you is critical. But now I want to think about what is a regenerative vision in relation to such. What is a vision that is planetary, that is people-based and planet-based from that perspective? And I think what we need to do is recognize that electronic waste doesn't necessarily mean it remains waste. We have to recognize something very powerful that I think gets us out of some of the messes we're in, which is human creativity. People around our planet can do more with less when they face constraints. Innovation doesn't just mean building the latest iPhone. It also means being resourceful. It means hustling. And this is what people in Kenya, Ethiopia, South Africa, where I've been doing field work over some years, have been telling me. They call it jua kali in Swahili, hot sun. I'm going to do more with less, I'm going to hustle. Because electronic waste, I'll just give you that as an example, as one example of a regenerative economic vision. 75 million tons of electronic waste right now in the world in the next 5 years. That's bigger than the Great Wall of China. Yet it's estimated that these kinds of practices of supporting and incentivizing people to repair, to recycle, to regenerate technologies, to breathe life into waste, right? to take things that are dead, that are necropolitical, and make them life-based, that can generate, by the World Economic Forum, $4.5 trillion over the next 10 years. So these are models that we should never exoticize the inequalities of our world, but also recognize that in human creativity lies so many pathways for us to just listen and learn and think about what are the subsidies, the policies, the design approaches that incentivize and support these forms of human creativity. So I want to give you an example of what people are doing with such. So I've spent a great deal of time in open air markets in Africa, India, South America, and so on, doing ethnographic work, doing storytelling work, and it's been super fascinating. And believe it or not, I'll just give you this as an example. In Kenya, they are building 3D printers, and this isn't about the 3D printer per se, but any technology out of electronic waste. 3D printers that are outperforming American and Chinese 3D printers. How are they able to do that? 80 to 90% of these printers, not only are they stronger in their performance than American and Chinese ones because they're designed for the local environment, but people have almost no resources to build these. So what are they doing? They're taking plastic bottles that are on the street, trash, single-use plastics, using convection and conduction to turn them into filament, taking parts of abandoned photocopiers, Xerox copier machines, pulling out the circuit boards out of that, and wiring up these 3D printers. And what is absolutely wonderfully recursive in my mind is this is called filament. They're making it out of these plastic bottles, and they're printing 3D printers themselves out of material from these plastic bottles. Isn't that incredible? That's not just regenerative, it's infinitely cyclical, huh? Circularity. But this is a type of creativity that comes when people do more with less. And so the question is what is that? They are building tens of thousands of microscopes made out of this trash. It's no longer trash, right? I shouldn't even call it that. They're building tens of thousands of these that are of microscopes for pennies on the dollar that are in schools all over East Africa. All starting with almost no capital, no investment, just creativity and passion and the realities in an unequal world of how do I hustle? How do I make it work? How do I make life work for me? How do I breathe life into waste? And when I get to witness things like that, I feel blessed. I learn so much from these kinds of efforts, which is why I want to share these with you. So this is my friend Nehemiah. He studied mechanical engineering. He was driving for Uber, making, pennies per hour. And he said, I really want to build these things. And he's connected to a group called Africa Born 3D. And I've been writing about them and many other entrepreneurs. I mean, we're actually seeing examples, for example, in Mercato, which is the biggest market in all of Africa, in Addis Ababa. I spent 2 weeks combing this market, talking to everyone I could, that a kid from Mercato, kind of a street kid from Mercato, Sam Alamehu, is now, connected to many investments that are coming, from African entrepreneurs, and has built the largest, basically waste to energy renewable resource plant in all of East Africa right now. So he started as a street kid. He started in a tough kind of situation, a tough environment. He had to hustle and struggle, but his creativity, his vision, his drive, his recognition, this is a question of survival, is what innovation comes from. So there's so much that can be done through policies, subsidies, but most importantly, not world making, but world listening that can take us in these directions. And Juliana Rotish, many of you know her, who's actually the reason I'm here today and the reason I came to DLD 3 years ago, who's going to be speaking on Sunday, is another incredible entrepreneur that many of you should meet and speak to. So Juliana is one of the inventors of Ushahidi, and here she is giving a TED Talk some years ago about BRIC, BRCK, which is good friends of mine. All renewable solar-powered Wi-Fi connectivity, employing hundreds of people, using a lot of waste products, and really basically an example of a business that grew up in Nairobi. And they asked this question in Nairobi, if we can design something for people in Nairobi, we can design it for people anywhere, right? That's their motto. So we have to really think about the design possibilities that are part of this. So really thinking about in moments like this, where we just saw in Sharm el-Sheikh, the dedication of a climate fund to support countries that are vulnerably and disproportionately harmed by the climate crisis, we can see so many different kinds of possibilities that came about. So we can think about policies like device commons, like Creative Commons, where people, when they have phones that are go to die, they can donate them to part of this commons and support entrepreneurs all over the world. So that's one example of many of a regenerative economic vision for technology. And the last example I want to give you is really about these questions of community networks. This is another example that we can turn to as we think about a regenerative vision. What are jobs of the future? How do we work with waste and turn it into life? But also recognize that people all around the world are building digital networks and mobile networks of all kinds. So this is my friend Osvaldo. I talked about him a few years ago. He's a Zapotec indigenous elder from the mountains of Oaxaca. And he and his friends are responsible for the largest set of community-owned and designed cell phone networks and mesh networks, digital networks in the world. In the process, they've hired hundreds, if not thousands. They've turned waste into life with a lot of raw materials they're using to build these towers. They're able to connect with their family and friends and other businesses for pennies on the dollar or pesos on the dollar. And in the process, it's not just employment, but a really example of digital literacy skills that can emerge in the process. So many of my examples were Africa or Latin America, but recognize these same initiatives are underway in Detroit right now. So the key point I just want to take away here is a regenerative vision for technology doesn't look at technology as alive and then dead. It doesn't look at us as just blind consumers. It gets us out of this anxious versus weirdly utopic rabbit hole when it comes to technology and AI. It recognizes we have power. And in the recognition that voice and power are in our hands, we have an opportunity for collaboration and listening, turning waste into value, recognizing that all of us can be innovators and designers of technology, that all of us can be part of policy frameworks that create jobs of the future and living wages of the future. That's the world we have in front of us. That's the world we have in front of us. And it's our opportunity to make that happen. So subsidies, regulatory policies, business models, design models, we have so many tools in front of us right now. Who wants to do it with me? Thank you all very much.